The Silent King and the Pariah Nexus are being attacked on all sides. Call's constructing Blackstone devices that might have the potential to change the game against Chaos, and Vashtorr the Archifane is abroad in the galaxy once again, drawn by the unleashing of deadly technology. Let's talk about Warhammer 40K's new lore update. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought I'd take a video to talk through the events of the Warhammer Crusade expansion Pariah Nexus, a big conflict that's pushing the narrative forward for a whole bunch of major characters. The book's the latest in Games Workshop's expansions of Warhammer 40k. This one a Crusade only one, and it costs £35, €45 or $60. Within the book there's a good section of lore detailing Call's assault on the Pariah Nexus and everything that unfolds from that, as well as a whole bunch of Crusade rules for narrative campaigns, a fun few systems including mining Blackstone, a bunch of unique battle traits and relics for fighting in the benighted space of the Pariah Nexus, and some interesting missions with systems for attackers and defenders with advantages and disadvantages. The bit that perhaps had me the most interested though were the lore developments of the book, as it really is quite a big conflict with a bunch of major players in attendance, and it's kind of the progression of the story that started towards the start of 9th edition, when the Imperium's Indomitus Crusades discovered the horror of the Pariah Nexus. A battle group called Calades essentially encountered a Necron Blackstone-controlled area of space, the Blackstone being negatively charged to be able to shut out Chaos and the Warp, which does mean that you don't get any warp storms or anything like that, but it also has a horrific effect on anything with a soul, making a stilled area of space where all within it gradually succumb to apathy and stillness and don't even make the efforts to continue living anymore. Strong-willed individuals can resist it, but being inside this area of space for too long a time has massive effects on planetary populations and armies. Having souls isn't a problem that the Necrons have though, and the entire thing was designed by the Silent King and Illuminor Serras, both with the goal of countering the threat of Chaos and the Warp, and also the chilling process of the stilling gives them lots of vessels that they can experiment on to attempt to try and reverse the biotransference, to see if there's some way that the Necron tier species can find a way back to flesh and blood from their soulless metal bodies that the Catan forged for them, though I probably wouldn't be holding out too much hope for them on that front. The lore of the space was developed further in that Warhammer Plus miniseries that they did, plus there's quite a few notable characters involved: Kyria Draxus, Ephrael Stern, and Ultramarines, Imperial Fist, Sisters, Guards and Knights, all making up part of the battle group. The initial waves of Imperial assault on the Nexus came from battle group Calades and Orpheus, which quickly became bogged down against the immense Necron threat. They did manage to take several systems within the Nexus, but as Sarek became aware of them, and was able to press the Imperial forces back with relentless waves of his own Necron legions, without too much apparent worry on his part, pressing back these first few battle groups to a few fortified systems, despite the best efforts of the Imperial forces. Due to the stilled warp of the Pariah Nexus, the battle group couldn't evacuate easily, and couldn't even use their astropaths properly to call for aid. The Imperial Fist erecting a great Stormvor fortress, and spending a great number of their psychers and librarians to create a signal that's big enough to breach the stilling and get back to the Imperial forces at the galaxy at large. Until now, the Nephilim sector basically being an area of complete quiet. Nobody knew what was going on in the area due to being unable to broadcast messages back to the greater galaxy. It seems that for the Necron's part, just about every major Necron player is active in the sector. Trazen the Infinite was spotted trying to acquire things for his own ends. Orican the Diviner had prophecies that sensed of a great catastrophe. Imotekh the Stormlord was making his way toward the sector gathering his forces, and most of the major dynasties are all present. The Silent King's own Saracen dynasty, but also Novok, Mefrit and Nihilak, basically the majority of Necron forces that we know in the lore. In response to the Imperial signals, the Admech are the ones that answer. Belisarius Cawl himself marshals an enormous explorator fleet, codenamed Battlegroup Hephaestus, to reinforce the Imperium. Though in reality their plan is kind of twofold. They certainly want to stop the Imperial forces from collapsing, but also want to use the opportunity to acquire vast quantities of Blackstone to construct devices that Cawl has designed called liminal bracers, great big shipborne devices that allow the Imperium to more precisely control the warp with a bit of science, as opposed to just jumping through it as they warp travel. He's been joined by a cohort of radical tech priests, many of which seem to have smuggled experimental or forbidden weapons to the Nexus if they needed to tip the balance in moments of last resort. When the Mechanicus forces arrive to the Nexus, the forces are primarily made of Mars and Metallica, though there's plenty of other smaller contingents from Ryza and other more minor Forge worlds. Cawl then, rather than keeping everything together in one vast fleet, decides to divide forces into multiple accretion fleets or Aegis fleets. The accretion fleets basically going on big mining missions, stripping worlds of the valuable Blackstone before the Necrons can get their hands on it, and the Aegis ones are tasked to seek out and defend any remaining Imperial survivors, reinforce their systems, and hold back the relentless assaults of the Necron forces. They discovered that the war had had some brutal backs and forths, Ephrael Stern leading a great victory at the planet of Cheris, though the previous in command, Group Master Moran, had been slain by a Necron assassin construct. Many of the Aegis fleets are successful in stabilising the front line as they find Imperial forces holding out, though also several are lost as they're overrun by Necron forces trying to reinforce systems that are already lost. Necrons still seem to have a vast numerical advantage and are gradually overrunning more and more Aegis fleets, though often midway through battles the Necrons have a change of heart, disappearing or phasing out, seemingly distracted by a completely different threat, and aren't pushing home their victories. It turns out that the reason for this is that Imotekh the Stormlord has launched a rebellion within the Pariah Nexus, leading his Sautekh dynasty on an all-out assault on the Silent King, and plotting a very cleverly moved campaign bit by bit to overcome the vast forces of the Necron's triarchal ruler. Imotekh's law is that he's basically one of the most successful original Necron overlords to awaken in the more recent times of the 41st millennium, and he was able to take and consolidate power before the Silent King returned to the scene, and he's none too keen for the Silent King just to turn up and retake the head of the Necron Empire. Imotekh's forces largely assault the northeast of the Pariah Nexus, compared with the more sort of western direction that the Imperials have been approaching from, and he initially manages to rapidly take 3 outlying systems, from then on serving as his staging posts. The Stormlord is near religious in his attitude to appear as the honourable combatant in the conflict. He wishes to be seen as the true ruler of the Necron race. He adheres to every code of honour, including things like offering retreats to forces that he's about to annihilate, trial by champion when appropriate if it will preserve overall Necron strength, and even within these confines, conducting a masterful campaign that outwit the Silent King, and he continues to make advances against them, against the Saracen and other loyal dynasties. Imotekh doesn't have as much interest in reversing the biotransference, but just taking power as the de facto Necron ruler as they are. Fighting a war on 2 fronts, Imotekh's invasion greatly distracts Zarek the Silent King, and he sees him as the greater threat. As the Necrons are distracted by infighting, Cawl is able to capitalise at least somewhat by continuing his Blackstone harvest. It's made a bit more clear that these liminal blazers that Cawl is trying to tow along behind his ships are enormous Blackstone constructions that will take a great deal of both resources and technical expertise to be able to construct, and these should be able to modulate the warp both in a positive and negative way, potentially nullifying the effects of the Pariah Nexus in a local area, and have the interesting possibility that they could be used to perhaps quell warp storms and things, maybe get a bit of local Pariah Nexus effects to counteract things in the Great Rift, which was one of the projects that Guilliman charged Cawl with. Having a ship able to calm the warp with liminal abrasers could be an interesting way of getting reinforcements across to the Imperium Nihilus, I suppose. And construction begins on these great devices within the Pariah Nexus, the accretion fleets seeming to have met their Blackstone quota. It's reported that Rabute Guilliman himself is now finding it important enough to take interest in the Pariah Nexus himself, and is now heading there at the head of a large Indomitus fleet, having previously been tied up fighting the Death Guard in the Plague Wars and their attack on Ultramar. Kyria Draxus, the Ordo Xenos Inquisitor, also manages to make her presence felt as well. Previously, she'd been able to unshackle some Catan shards that the Necrons had trapped, and once free, those Catan enact bloody revenge on nearby Necron forces. As a result, Illuminor Seraz has been sending death marks after to try and hunt her down, but it doesn't stop her from requisitioning an Admech fleet, perhaps bravely or unwisely joining a conflict between Zarek's and Imotekh's forces in full swing, using the diversion of the 3-way conflicts to infiltrate and destroy a Blackstone pylon, striking a major blow against the integrity of the Nexus. The Silent King is actually now somewhat feeling the pressure, having enough to have to deal with the calculated advances of Imotekh the Stormlord, never mind the Imperium causing problems and damaging the Pariah Nexus in its integrity. To score some cheap wins against the Imperium, the Silent King turns to the shadowy cult of cryptex known as the Technomandrites, an organisation from back during the Necron War in Heaven against the Old Ones, that functioned as ancient arms traders for the Necron race and held enormous power. Since then, their influence has been far since waned after dynasties uprose against them, but still harbour a great many of powerful forbidden technologies that are considered gross violations of the Necron Code of Honor, horrific weaponry that's often unable to be fully controlled by the Necrons that unleash it. To crush and disrupt the human advances, though, the Silent King authorises the use of such weapons, some of which including splintering a Catan shard that creates spectral constructs running amok within Admech forces, launching a bound dwarf star into the heart of an Admech fleet, and a magnetic weapon that flattens mountains and annihilates armies, blasting the surface of a planet apart with a powerful electrical current. As mentioned though, the Admech certainly brought their own techno-horror toys along to the party. A vast contramolecular shockwave weapon that annihilates a good chunk of an advancing Necron fleet, a singularity black hole generator that, when unleashed, both destroys their Necron fleet, plus the Adeptus Mechanicus fleet that unleashed it, and a good portion of the nearby planet, and a mechanical bioplague that renders Necron living metal into mulch, though of course doesn't spare any Admech or humans that happen to get in the way. Basically, with every single one of these super weapons unleashed, there's at least some collateral damage to the side that did the unleashing of them, plus rendering planets or chunks of the Pariah Nexus uninhabitable, or the sites of such disasters that they could never be used again by human or Necron. At least one more of the Blackstone pylons is greatly damaged in the fallout by these super weapons, and the Imperial allies are none too happy about the gross carnage unleashed by the Adeptus Mechanicus, often their forces just being coldly calculated into whether or not the numbers and the potential collateral is worth it versus the toll that it can take on the Necron forces. With the escalating arms race of technological horrors, Zarek chooses to focus more firmly on the humans, and decides he will marshal his forces to sweep aside the humans first before turning his attention fully to Imotekh. With this in mind, he gathers a huge fleet to overrun the humans once and for all, though he is certainly losing allies by this stage. Several peripheral dynasties are choosing to rally to Imotech's banner, seeing the Silent King's actions as going far too far with the unleashing of these devastating weapons of the Technomandrites, particularly in contrast with Imotech's honourable conduct. Imotekh chooses to hold back his forces a little as the conflict escalates, Orican the Diviner being one of the ones that chooses to side with him. As one of the first major waves of Zarek's new forces assault the Imperium, a Majos Gelf at the helm of an Accretion fleet decides to use one of his own pet toys to attempt to strike a great blow at the Necron forces seeking to overrun them and also destroy the pylon at the world of Scarran. His mind apparently fraying with desperation and paranoia, he chooses to unleash a powerful satellite servitor network weapon called Shiverix Constellation, a whole bunch of weaponized satellites with enormously powerful energy weapons that decimate a huge portion of the Necron fleet. These untested satellites in the Age of Darkness begin to overload and detonate though, and it seems that the satellites are tainted in some way, as with their explosions and detonations, a great rift appears in reality, bringing a new and wholly unwelcome visitor to the conflict. Into Pariah Nexus suddenly arrives Vashtorr the Archithane at the helm of his webway tunneling device Wormwood, the old world of Caliban from the Dark Angels, ripping their way into the heart of the Nexus, apparently able to sustain their chaos presence due to the Necron pylon at Scarron becoming corrupted, perhaps becoming positively charged to allow the warp into the Pariah Nexus, an area of space that should be complete anathema to any kind of demon spawn. I can't help but think that Vashtorr is going to be at the height of his strength around this sort of area though, if he can manifest here, given the sheer amount of forbidden technology and scientific superweapons deployed by both sides. It seems like exactly the sort of thing that he'd enjoy. The Chaos forces are truly colossal, both fleets are attacked and fall back before the enormity of this new Chaos threat, and it now seems that the conflict potentially has four sides to it: Imotekh, the Silent King, Cawl and the Imperials, and now Chaos with Vashtorr, all fighting for control of regions of the Nexus. Unfortunately, the book treats Vashtorr's arrival as a bit of a cliffhanger without us really knowing what happens next. It's unclear what his intentions are here, whether or not he is trying to find something to further his ends and unlock that great vault of weapons that he was trying to get before, or whether this happens to just be a chance emergence summoned in by all this tech heresy. I feel like by the time that Rebute Gilliman gets here, the sector's going to be a bit of a mess. He's going to have his work cut out, both cleansing chaos and the might of the Necrons on their home turf. In any case, kind of fun to see what's been going on in the Pariah Nexus, and I must admit I did quite enjoy the idea of Admech and Necrons just going toe-to-toe, lobbing eldritch super weapons they barely understand at each other. I'm very intrigued as to what comes next with Vashtorr, given that everything's basically been going right for him, and this could represent the next phase of his plan to get his hands on whatever eldritch weapons he thinks will need to convert him into a chaos deity to stand along the sides of Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch and Slaanesh. Let me know what you think of the lore anyway, or let me know any other details I might have missed. Look forward to hearing your ideas down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.